Hello and welcome to Stream City Sports, streamcity.org and Stream City Radio as we get ready to swap things up a little bit. I planned on talking about the strength of the college conferences, but my computer decided that wasn't a good idea and deleted all my files. So I did recover them, but didn't have time to make the notes I needed to make this show. So we will crack open a show that we hadn't really started yet in the college football fix. And that's what it's about. It's about addressing the issues college football faces because there are many. And to be honest, college football, in my opinion, is on the verge of losing its soul. We're losing the things that make college football great. Now, there's some good things that have come in the last few years. More teams are involved later in the season, so that's always good. But, the reality is, we need a plan that absorbs the changes that have taken place, all the genies you can't put back in a bottle, good, bad, or indifferent, and preserves all the things that have made college football great and made us fall in love with it. And I think that can be done, but you got to have somebody running it. And the problem we face in college football is there's basically nobody running it. And we are a rudderless ship without a captain is where we find ourselves. The reality is I find college football far superior to pro football. I'm not a huge NFL fan. I think, everything about college football to me is preferable with the exception of the play on the field is better than the NFL. That's not an argument you can have. It's not even comparable. It's the difference between college and high school. It's better. Partially because you're boiling down the talent. It's a much smaller pool of talent, so it's going to get better. So that leaves college football in a situation where you can't be a carbon copy of the NFL. You have to emphasize the things that make you different and make you better. Now, ESPN, Fox, those guys would just soon break off the top 40 teams and create basically an NFL light. Not good for college football, won't fly, and you'll destroy your product in the end. Now, I don't think those guys worry that much about it because they'll kill the golden goose and move on to the next one. Doesn't really matter to them. And, the reality is popularity of college football, it will always draw numbers. Now, you could hurt yourself where you draw much smaller numbers than you could. And I think we are headed very much in that direction. The problem is we have the NCAA trying to run this thing. They haven't adjusted to anything since 1983 when they lost the lawsuit to Oklahoma and Georgia over TV rights. And they continue to run it like it's 1950. You can't do that and be successful. They lose every lawsuit they're dragged into. I don't know whether they have the worst attorneys in the world or they're just the dumbest idiots running anything ever. Make your own call on that. And, the problem is, well, we won't get into the legal system. But let's just say, just because they're making a decision one way doesn't mean that's the way it necessarily should have been. But that's a whole nother, that's a show I did years ago. We won't go into that one. But to me, there's no master plan. And without a master plan, you are headed for disaster. I don't care whether you're running an Apple stand or the NCAA. There has to be a plan in place, and we don't have one. Everything is reactionary. It's like a bunch of 6-year-olds got together with a box of crayons and they're making it up as they go along. And it's not working out well. When you've got 43 kids from Iowa State transferred to Penn State because the coach went there, you can't have that happen. You can't run a sports league that way. Now, granted, we've got a little bit of a hybrid. It's not a professional sports league. It's still college athletics where they're getting compensated, but they're not employees. So you're walking a lot of fine lines here. So somebody's got to come in and set down some hard and fast rules that will stand up. And I promise you, it is not a politician. Now, what the politicians could do is step in with some kind of antitrust protection. That, I think, does need to happen. But, I mean, you've got to do something, because we are headed down a road that is not going to turn out well for anybody. And, everything from scheduling to realignment, to make this thing work, you need somebody who can come in and run this thing and has the strength to tell the conferences when they can screw themselves. Because this has got to be a bigger picture. Because I'm going to tell you, I don't care how big and bad the SEC and the Big Ten think they are, the two of them could not combine and create a conference that would be successful. Short term, yes, not long term. Because what you're failing to realize if you try and go that route is the amount of hate that will be directed at that group of schools and teams. I'm a fan of one of those schools, and I would not be supportive of this because it's not good for college football. And every school that got left out, the fans of those schools would never, ever watch it. They would go out of their way not to watch it. People think you've got a short memory. People have a short memory about things that are not emotional. Emotional things, people have a very long memory about. So if you created a league that left Georgia Tech out and put Georgia in, anybody in the state of Georgia that's not a Georgia fan will never watch it. They won't. Same thing if you did it in North Carolina, where you took North Carolina and left the rest of the schools out. Same situation. Yeah, you're going to have the biggest schools, but you are going to alienate everybody who's a fringe viewer and everybody who's not a fan of those schools. And to be honest with you, while I wouldn't quit pulling for Georgia, I would find a college football team to pull for, because in that scenario, they're not a college football team anymore. So you're walking a fine line. I think there's a line you can divide this at that everybody will be fine at, but it's not 30 or 40 teams. And if you listen to the folks at ESPN or Fox, you would think that that's the line you want to break it at, because all they want to do is make money, quick money, and don't care about the product and long-term health of college football. Because there's nobody who knows anything in any sort of a historical sense about college football that thinks that's a good way to go. If anybody is even pushing that issue, you need to look behind the scenes and see what their overarching drive is, because it's not college football. I can promise you that. And like I said, we may have reached the point, and this has happened before. This wouldn't be earth-shattering for it to happen. It happened back in the 70s where you created 1AA. We're probably reaching a point where it's time to do that again. And whether that's splitting it at 70 teams, 68 teams, 80 teams, what have you. You could split it. You've got 68 teams, including Notre Dame, right now that find themselves in one of the Power Four conferences. If you included Washington State and Oregon State in it, you're at 70. You could go to 80 and include everybody who could potentially even have a gripe, everybody who's ever at any time in a quote-unquote power conference, going back to the days of the Big East, and get everybody that would be remotely deserving to be at the highest level. The reality is you can split this thing at that point, because take the state of Georgia. You've got Georgia Tech, you've got Georgia fans. Everybody else in the state of Georgia, whether it's Kennesaw State, whether it's Georgia State, whether it's Georgia Southern, probably also pulls for Georgia Tech. And that applies across the board pretty much to every state in the union. If you look at Alabama, you've got Jacksonville State, Troy State, you've got South Alabama, you've got UAB, they all probably pull for Auburn or Alabama also. So, same thing with Tennessee. As long as Memphis has been around, they're not going to feel slighted. Now, they'd love to be in a bigger group, maybe. Maybe they wouldn't. So that's the thing. You might find out that even some of the teams that are currently in the power conferences might not opt to stay in there if you had an up-down vote of, okay, we're going to divide it at this point. This group is going to have to spend $22 million a year on football. This group has to spend 12. And you might see some teams like Stanford or Northwestern or some of these private institutions break off and say, you know what? We're good spending $12 million on football. We're going to go with that group, which could open the door for some Boise States and people like that. And if it's their choice, that will be received very differently than it being dictated to them. That fans will receive that very differently. They may be upset, but at least they'd be upset with their institution and not the governing body. And that's where you're going to lose people, is if people feel like their team got screwed. Because like I said earlier, people in this country have a short attention span and short memory until it is something emotional. If it's emotional, they will hold on to it far past the time they probably should. So thinking that you're going to be able to do a 40 team and everybody will be fine with it, you've lost your mind. You do not know human psychology or sports psychology or any of that on any level. And it would be an absolute disaster. The other thing that I think we need to come to terms with is, I think there's a thing of overexposure. And there's also, and that not necessarily the volume of the exposure, it's the way that you handle it. So that's once again having somebody creating the narrative and controlling the narrative would be beneficial to everybody involved. There is one of the things that makes football special, and it's been lost. Even the NFL seems to be failing to realize this. What makes football different than any other sport is it is destination event viewing. There's only one a week, and it used to be with the NFL, there were Sundays or they were Mondays. And now they might be Saturdays, they might be a Friday, they might be a Thursday. So controlling that narrative and narrowing it down could be good for everybody. The reality is college football has no business playing on Friday nights. You're harming high school football. High school football's got to be protected. You are literally killing the lifeline of your sport. So that needs to be understood, and Fox can go wherever they want to go. But this Friday night football for college needs to come to an end, because the only people benefiting from it, and I've heard ADs and coaches make idiotic arguments for why they should be on Friday night, is the networks. They're the only ones benefiting from it. Yeah, the school might get a big check. It's not a recruiting boost for you, because everybody you're trying to recruit is playing football. So you're not reaching recruits this way. Matter of fact, chances are you can't even invite recruits to the game, which is a major disadvantage when it comes to, if you've got 6 or 7 home games and you're giving one of them away to play it on a Friday night to get a check that you would have gotten 90% of if you'd have played it on Saturday anyhow. Let's not be foolish about this. Yeah, you get a great check for playing on Friday night. You're going to get it if you played on Saturday as well, or Thursday. So to me, the Friday nights is nonsense. I think The Mid-America Conference is hit on something with MACtion, and now you have Conference USA doing it in October. So you've got October, November, you've got Tuesday, Wednesday football. And it would seem like I'm making an argument that shouldn't happen. What I'm telling you is you control the narrative. Do Tuesday and Wednesday night for the group of 5. Don't allow teams to play more than 2 games on a weeknight. And make sure they're back to back so that you're protecting the student athlete without stupidity reigning supreme in scheduling. You could give them a couple of nights, a home and away on a Tuesday night, depending on, how many conferences you want to involve. I'd involve everybody in a group of 5. And, and now you're giving those conferences their own time, their own exposure, and people will watch it. But you still have the build-up to the biggest teams playing on Saturday or Thursday night. Because to me, you could turn Thursday night into literally the Monday night football of college football. Because nobody's watching the NFL on Thursday night anyhow. So, why not set up big games for Thursday night? Now, not every school's going to want to participate in it, and that's fine. The biggest schools don't want to. They're probably playing in prime time on Saturday anyhow. But if I'm Duke, I might rather play a big-time game on Thursday night as opposed to noon kickoff on Saturday. And that's another thing you could look at doing is maybe take those top-level group of 5 teams and schedule their games on the networks in that noon slot that nobody seems to want to play in all of a sudden. And let them get that national exposure, kind of the appetizer for the day for college football. But I think, if you structure it right, it's not talking about less football. It's just talking about having a plan for how you're going to roll these teams out there to maximize, 1, your dollars, and 2, the eyeballs and the interest. And here's the other thing that needs to happen. Eventually, and I've heard a couple of, I'm not sure who else floated this, but basically the top 80 teams, 72 teams, whatever you decide it's going to be, all declare football independence, and you restructure the whole thing. And you basically play each other. And you could then go to an NFL model for scheduling where you play everybody or you have 2 divisions. There's a ton of ways you can do this, and I'm going to break down in this show. We're going to probably give you a dozen options how this could happen. And not all of them, some of them you could take it right now and make it work without a whole lot of trouble, without everybody having to declare independence and all that stuff. But ultimately, that's probably where this thing needs to go. And then all the worry about conference, everybody then's on the same page. Everybody's drawing from the same bucket. But what that's going to do is that is going to tear up every TV contract that exists around college football. And that needs to happen. Because if we are going to make this competitive, and we are going to look out for the long-term health of college football, several things have to happen. And we'll get into all of those, but right off the bat is tear up those contracts. Every single school playing at the highest level gets the same check, period. We can't have schools making $20 million more than somebody they compete with. Now, they will be able to make more money because we're only talking about the TV revenue of this or whatever is, because it all goes into the league and then comes back out. And that's, not that different than the model we have right now. It's just being done on a conference by conference. This would be done as a league. And I think if you're going to ultimately be competitive, that is one thing that you need to borrow from the NFL. Because one thing, let's make no mistake about it, the NFL is more successful than any other sports league, period. It simply is. Now, we can debate how bad their leadership currently is because they're doing some stupid things right now, but that's not what this show's about. So take the good and borrow it and build off of it. But the revenue sharing has to be, from school to athlete, has to be maintained on a level basis. Now, there's places where it's not going to be level. Not every team in the NFL sells the same number of jerseys. You have seat licensing and all that stuff can still stay in place, and that's where a Georgia might make more money than a Vanderbilt, but it shouldn't be through TV revenue because you're basically one giant product. And that's the way it's going to have to be marketed. But here's the reality of it. If you are marketing 72 teams as a group, do you not understand how much more power you have in negotiating TV contracts? And I wouldn't divide out, as far as that goes, I would not divide out the group of five. I would negotiate that entire contract with them involved. So I'm bringing somewhere between 136 and 160 teams to the table, and we're going to negotiate as one body. And, you know, you could break it down where different different entities bid for, what is traditionally the Southeast Conference, or you could break it down however, because it's going to be hard to negotiate that thing out with, I'm buying 180 teams or 160 teams. That's not going to work. But if I took it and said, okay, if you want the SEC, basically that footprint, you're going to get Sun Belt with it. And we're going to negotiate the two of those together. And if you want the Big Ten, you're going to get the Mid-America Conference with it. And we're going to negotiate those two together. If you want the ACC, you're going to get the American. If you want the Big 12, you're going to get the Pac-12 or whatever that ends up being, because that, let's face it, the Pac-12 and the Mountain West are eventually going to be one conference if things continue to go the way they're going. I don't know, and I'm sure it comes back to TV money, but it made no sense for them to not just go ahead and merge now. But they didn't. And part of that comes back to Washington State and Oregon State wanting total control, or as much control as they could get. And I can't blame them the way they got, it's like getting somebody who just came out of a bad divorce. They're going to want a lot more control than you might normally have to give up. So we'll see if moving from the Mountain West to the Pac, whatever number they're going to put with it, maybe they'll just call it the Pacific Conference, because I think it's going to be a fluctuating number. I can understand the perception of why you'd want to make that move. We'll find out if in reality that's anything more than a lateral move. Because right now it feels like it could very much be just that, a lateral move. But if we don't get control of this, we desperately need somebody in charge that is running this with a master plan. I don't know that the conferences have a master plan. And you know what? Maybe the Big Ten and the SEC behind closed doors have got a master plan. I do not trust that the two guys running those conferences are going to look out for college football as a whole. Now, I may be wrong. I was very critical of Sankey when the SEC took Oklahoma and Texas. Thought it was a mistake. But looking at it from 100,000 feet, you've got to realize that if you didn't take them, their next phone call was the Big Ten. They were leaving the Big 12. I don't think the SEC particularly was looking to expand at the time, but giving that kind of binary choice of A or B, you got to take them. You have to. And that's why I think eventually Clemson and Florida State probably end up in the SEC, because I do not think Sankey is dumb enough to allow the Big Ten to get a footprint in the SEC territory, but he's going to have to be aggressive if he wants to keep that from happening. We can talk about all those things as this goes on. That's an expansion show that I could spend 2 days talking about. But, you know, that's something that we just need a plan. And we need somebody with enough power to make that plan happen. So thus the conferences are going to have to cede some power. It's, you know, what would the United States be if we didn't have a central government and we only had states? You'd have some good, you'd have some bad, but all in all, you'd be weaker when you look at the overall scheme of the world. And that's kind of the way we're at with college football. It is time, guys, to show a united front, and that is going to require people taking a backseat power-wise to a governing body. And that's what we desperately need. And, you know, it may be that, and I'm not advocating this for every sport because I don't think you need it in every sport, but it might be a situation where, and here's the other part. If everybody declared football independence, then we could go back to some rational conference alignments with the other sports that don't make money or don't make a lot of money. You know, there is zero reason for USC and UCLA to be playing softball in the Big Ten or baseball or any of the other sports. You know, in the long run, I have strong questions about whether that's even financially going to make any sense. Yeah, you're getting a lot of money you didn't have on the front end. UCLA was in a bad way financially in their athletic program. I understand that. And I also understand that this was driven more by Fox Sports than it was, I think, the Big Ten. But they've kind of sold out to Fox Sports. That's why stepping away from the Big Ten in football would give you some independence back, because the reality is we have got to start looking out for, number one, what is best for college football, not your network partners. And right now it's all being driven by the almighty dollar and the network concerns. And a lot of that comes back to NIL and the other things that there's no guardrails around. And you simply have to get a handle on that. It's not too late to fix this, but man, we're getting way down the tracks. And you just wonder if anybody has got the backbone to step up and take control of this. Because right now it appears we are just headed downhill with college football. And that's a shame, because there's some things about it that are as good as it's ever been. But the sustainability of where we find ourselves is the part that is scary. Take a break. We'll be back with more in just a minute, or the second part of this podcast, depending on where you are listening or watching, in just a minute here on Stream City Radio, streamcity.org, and Stream City Sports. Back.